Hello, this is Melissa Stockham, and this is the lecture supplement for general psychology. Yes, once again, we are staring at a thing of flowers in my art room. I'm still not feeling up to 100%. I'm still kind of sick, so just bear with me. I'll do my best to be on camera next week. This week, we talk a little bit about motivation. Motivation, of course, is an examination into why we do the things we do. We also look at emotions in this particular module of the course. Why is the study of motivation important? Because from an understanding of motivation, we can have an understanding of when things go wrong, when things like addictions happen, when things like behaviors that seem uncontrollable that have a negative effect on you. And so I think if you're going to talk about health psychology of any kind, you have to look at drives and motivations. A lot of the reasons why we get sick is because we do a lot of things that are to the point where they're unhealthy for us, or we shouldn't be doing them in the first place. So that is why the study of these matters is important. As you know, I was in Las Vegas last week. And of course, any type of vice you could possibly want is available for you in Las Vegas. So it's amazing. I'm the type of person, as far as gambling is concerned, where I can, literally play $20 and walk away from it, and don't have to keep going and think. But there are people, and quite frankly, the city of Las Vegas has capitalized on those people's weaknesses, as people who they can't stop once they start. And I know for one thing about Las Vegas is if you go there a lot, they will actually send you free hotel rooms in the mail. You'll get coupons for free hotels, coupons for free dinners, coupons. They'll even send you, if you're really a high roller, a plane fare. So they know the people who are willing. I have a good friend who is one of these people, and he's the type who'll put down $10,000 on one bet, which to me is absolute insanity, but to some people it's fun. So the question is, why do people do the things we do? And so I guess first thing to look at are motives. Motives are actually hypothetical states that activate behavior towards a goal. Whenever we talk about, as a criminal defense attorney, if you're talking about the difference between a case that could be a murder and a case that could be a manslaughter, one of the things you look at is intent. And in one of the forms of intent is motive. Did this person kill another person because the other person stood to inherit millions of dollars? Was there an envy? Was there profit, revenge, or just good old homicidal mania? Could all be examples of motives. Others are physical needs. What are physical needs? They're physiological and psychological needs combined together. Needs are a good thing. The body creates them naturally as a means of survival. We have a physical need for food. We have physical need for sex. We have physical need for oxygen. We have physical need for you name it. And these are things that are there for a reason. Kind of like drives, the same thing. Needs give rise to drives, and of course, drives arouse us to some sort of action to act upon them. So they have the need that leads to a drive. One of the theories of motivation is homeostasis. Homeostasis is the idea that the body will naturally, with no real effort on the part of the individual, maintain back to a state of equilibrium, normalcy, and ideal health. But of course, things might get in the way. If you are in some state of pain or something like that, then homeostasis comes in to maintain an equilibrium. I have a friend who's a yoga instructor who insists that the body works that way, that we're not inclined to get old and sick. Our bodies are inclined to get better. Could be. I don't know. Another theory is called the search for stimulation. The idea is that you seek to increase stimulation. This is, of course, more common um, um, in other animals other than humans. Um, One example of a search for stimulation study that is particularly interesting when you're talking about addiction is the study of the rat park. And this is very controversial in addiction studies. I do not claim to be an addiction specialist. I'll be honest, I just read about it. It sounded interesting and it sounded consistent with reality. Basically, the traditional theories of addiction basically say that once you become addicted to a particular substance or process, remember, you can get addicted to things, to processes. Gambling is a fine example of a process addiction. Other people become addicted to their work. Other people become addicted to church activities or other activities of that sort. Things can become addicting. And so, I mean, my latest vice is Candy Crush. And the new one, Disney Emoji Blitz. Oh my goodness. But, the idea behind what they did is they took rats and they gave them cocaine. They had access to cocaine. And of course, the rats eventually, they had water with cocaine in it. Eventually, some of the rats did become addicted. But the researcher who studied this looked at the environment that the rats were in and said, okay, this rat is basically sitting in a cage with in a maze where they basically have access to nothing but the water. So, of course, there's no stimulation there. So what the creators of the rat park experiment did is they created a world kind of like what a rat would like, with fellow rats to play with things to do, a wheel to play in, all the things that rats like, and a good environment for them with things that stimulate them and motivate them. They found that the rats who had the sterile environment were much more likely to develop too much interest in the cocaine water, whereas the ones in Rat Park didn't. They could take it or leave it. The cocaine water was sitting next to regular water, and they would drink the regular water more likely than that. What does this tell us about addiction? It tells us that there might be we look at addiction as something intrinsic, but could addiction basically be a reaction to an external world? Now, you tell certain, and I don't mean to step on any toes in saying this, you tell certain individuals in the addiction treatment establishment that might be a good solution to help people in that situation, and you'll be met with almost definite skepticism. That is what the addiction establishment calls a geographical solution to what they consider a metaphysical or spiritual problem. Again, I'm not going there, but at the same time, I think, if we're going to really treat addiction, the sad thing is most addictions programs have a 95% failure rate. It is hard to break habits once they're established. So, I think we need to look at addiction and say for some people it might be because some people might be self-medicating. Others might not. So I think you have to look at it all from an eclectic perspective. And I think that the turf battles that many people in the addictions establishment are involved in, I think, that sometimes you have to doubt a little bit of your own infallibility, I think, in this business. The humanistic theory of motivation, Abraham Maslow, we have a hierarchy of needs starting with physiological and then all the way up to safety, love and belonging, esteem, and self-actualization. The idea behind that is that people will respond to the lower needs before they will be able to reach the higher needs. So I think, it makes a lot of sense in one sense. However, one of the big problems I see with this is, if you want to lose weight fast, go to graduate school. You have to decide between food and books. Sometimes books fail, especially right before an exam. I can tell you, I've got 2 graduate degrees, a master's in psychology and a law degree. And both times I went to graduate school, I lost weight. So that's kind of putting the self-actualization or esteem needs ahead of physiological needs, even if only temporarily. Your text talks a little bit about hunger, eating disorders. I'd commend that to your reading, anorexia and bulimia. And there's a lot of controversy, of course, as to the origins of eating disorders. One thing is the profile of a young woman with most of the people with eating disorders are young women. Most of them come from upper to middle class families. They're usually very driven families where, everybody's expected to make top grades and be in the ballet and get in the ballet and the Nutcracker every year and things like that. Also, again, another thing is what activities are young ladies involved in. I'm not saying that everybody who gets involved in ballet or gymnastics ends up anorexic, but unfortunately, those two sports call for, in many instances, a super thin body, and in that case, oftentimes we do see eating disorders. When we do see eating disorders in men or in young boys, it's usually either, again, child abuse of some sort going on. Two, it's in tandem with something else, like, for example, hyper anxiety. Or you do see bulimia in young boys who are in wrestling because they have to qualify for certain weight levels, and so if they can get to a lower level, sometimes that means less competition, so oftentimes you might see that. You occasionally see eating disorders in gay men. And again, gay male culture one of the real problems is gay male culture is very geared towards young men who are slim. Same thing with women. I mean, what does our culture value as far as what is considered attractive? Young, thin, perfect hair, perfect skin, perfect everything. Doesn't really work that way. Book talks a little bit about sexual motivation and sexual orientation. Again, sex is a biological urge because that's how babies are made. And so, again, the question comes, if you look at sexual behavior towards an evolutionary perspective, you can see a lot of it in mate selection. And the idea behind that is, if you're looking at basically that our purpose is to permeate the species, for a man, it is to his advantage to impregnate as many women as possible. Yes, I agree that is sexist. However, that if you look at it from a biological perspective, that is what they believe. The more sex they have with many different women, the more likely a man is to conceive and those children not die in famine or war, so he would be more likely to have children that reach the next generation. It also can be used to explain why women tend to prefer men who in some way or another have financial means. Basically, the idea being most likely that a woman's going to be out for about 9 months having a baby. Most likely she's going to have to spend part of her life taking care of small babies. And so, as a result of that, women will prefer a man who has the financial means to take care of her during those times when she can't. Again, I agree it's slightly sexist, but I don't make the statements, I just report them. Talk about your text gives some information about sexual orientation. Heterosexual is basically being interested in people of the opposite sex. Homosexual, people of the same sex. Bisexual, attracted both females and males. And so, this is pretty commonplace. I remember when I first started taking psychology classes back in the 90s. I was a college kid in the 90s. Back then, I can tell you, it may be hard to believe today, but back then, when somebody was gay, it was scandalous. In my hometown, I grew up in Jacksonville, which is a pretty big town. My parents knew people who committed suicide because it was discovered they were gay, or because they could not keep living a lie like before. I remember when my best friend from 10th grade came out of the closet to me, and at the time, I was still pretty shocked, and I was in the time involved in a religious organization that kind of thought gay people were sinful and had to change, otherwise they wouldn't go to heaven. And that was actually a very common belief amongst the religious community where I grew up. And I remember coming home from when my friend came out of the closet to me, and I told my mom, who knew this guy from when we were kids, I said, I can't believe he's gay. And my mom looks at me and goes, duh. Of course he was. I picked up on that immediately. I said, but Mom, I didn't pick up on it. So, you know, things have very much changed. There's a lot more acceptance. There's a lot more understanding. I would argue there would have been more, even when I was a teenager, more understanding and acceptance of gay people. But for sadly, the fact that when the AIDS epidemic came through, um, I'm not saying, well, gay people, because if you, there's a movie I'd commend to you if you're interested, it's called And the Band Played On. It's on HBO. Made the point that most of the first people who came down with AIDS were, in fact, homosexuals. And it was nothing about homosexual behavior itself or sexual activity that was causing it. It was just the fact that when a lot of gay men did come out, even privately to themselves, at the time, I mean, it was not uncommon for a lot of gay men to have in the neighborhood of, you know, 200 or 300 sex partners a year, which, I mean, that's a lot. I mean, that's different sexual encounters. 300 a year, there's only 365 days in a year. So, the idea and unfortunately, I think that sadly was one of the reasons why gay acceptance took so long. But now we live, I think, believe in a different world on that front. And, thankfully people are free to be themselves. And I'm way over time with this. I'm sorry it took so long, but I look forward to seeing you in the chat rooms. Take care. Bye-bye.